Kevin, hi.
I am in. How are you
How are
guys?
you? Well, we were
Wonderful,
just,
thanks.
what a coincidence, Kevin. We were just talking about you. And I was saying to Kara, there are a lot of people in Silicon Valley she's not crazy about. But
Yeah.
one of the people she really, really likes, Kevin, is you. You're in rare company. Now,
Yeah.
what is it about Kevin, Kara, that you like?
Well, I really do admire, there's a lot of people I had a lot of wrangling with like Steve Jobs, who I actually did like too. I like people who love products. I love people who have a design sense, have a real care about products and designing them correctly. I like someone who's thoughtful and is willing to change their minds. Um, Kevin was always open to criticism in a way that he wasn't hurt all the time. If you criticize anybody in Silicon Valley now, they get hurt and then they call you, they sort of adopted the language of Donald Trump. They attack you back in a really
Uh-huh.
ridiculous way. Today, Mark Andreessen did it with his idiotic thing about techno optimism. Anyone who's not for it is the enemy. And it's kind of ridiculous not to have a nuanced view of technology, but the negatives and the positives. I'm a big fan of tech and I love my friggin' iPhone. I love it. Like I do. And I don't need, I want to have discussions with people about what they're making, what they're doing. And Kevin's always been open to that.
And Kevin, I mean, it seems like you have a lot of humility, which is a quality that's probably hard to come by in Silicon Valley. How have you approached your work in a way that makes you as open as Kara claims you are, and as humble, honestly, as you are?
I was having dinner with a friend last night, and we were talking about Artifact and my current project and how it's going and the future of it. And I said, I think the difference between the people that succeed in the long run and the people that continue to fail are the people that do their best to recognize their blind spots and that everyone has them. And the problem is, at least in Silicon Valley, that these companies grow to be so large that if you stay in charge, you can ignore your blind spots because you've got your moat, you've got your, I won't call it a monopoly. You've got your defense, and you can ignore all of the things you don't know about yourself because you're successful and you continue to be successful and you have all this money. The problem is, let's imagine you sell your company and you're no longer in charge of your company and you have to go face the real world. You have to get in touch with your failings and your weaknesses pretty quickly. Otherwise, you get chewed up and spit out the other side. That's what every entrepreneur has to do at some point in their life. The problem is the people that Kara is talking about, I believe, are the people who get to the point where they don't have to really think about those things because they're just riding the wave that they caused maybe 10 or 20 years ago. I don't have that wave anymore. You have to create a new wave. And in order to create that wave, I think you need to understand where you're good, where you're not good. And sometimes that can be a painful process.
Well, Kevin, it's also a question of maturity, right? I sort of link, I split people between adults and toddlers, really. I don't know what else to say, is adult toddlers who get enabled and coddled. And you know this from having money. You don't know who's your friend. You have people in violent agreement with you almost all the time. And I think one of the issues is when I was, writing about this Mark Andreessen thing, it's like such a straw man argument that people are cut up into different groups and tribes and this and that. And the ability to take feedback is very hard when everybody is enabling you not to do so. And I think it makes you a lesser executive, in my opinion. And you don't hear. Let me tell you who you don't hear from about that. Who doesn't complain when you complain when you have a thought about their product is the people from Apple. You don't hear Tim Cook belly aching about anything because he's an adult. And so I think, and I don't think you have to be old to be an adult. I think you were an adult from very early on. I mean, that was my feeling at the time.
Well, let's
I
talk about
appreciate
early
that.
on, Kevin, because I know we have so much to cover, but I do want to start with Instagram just because I'm addicted to
Sure.
it and I've been going down endless rabbit holes, much to my chagrin. I mean, constantly. It's really hard. It is addictive. But where did the idea from Instagram come from?
It came from we were working on a different app, not Instagram, called Bourbon. and it was spelled Burbn. And the name doesn't matter. It was funny, but it was a check-in app. It let you share your location. So you could say, I'm at a restaurant, I'm at a bar, and all your friends would see where you were. And it was kind of riding this wave of check-in apps. So you had
Foursquare was the
Foursquare, Gowalla, Hot
Yeah.
Potato.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of
Looped.
them.
Was Looped in there?
Looped,
Was
yep.
Yep.
Here's the thing. People forget that maybe they don't forget, but it's easy to forget that we see these waves of like everyone's doing generative AI all at once. Everyone's doing Web3. My version of that when I started was check-in apps. Everyone was doing check-in apps. And we started this check-in app. And the one feature that we had that no other check-in app had was the ability to add photos. And you can attach a photo to your check-in. So you could say, I'm at the beach, here's me at the beach. And no one really liked our check-in app. No one really wanted to use it. I mean, we had a small group of people playing with it. And, we took a step back, Mike Krieger and I, my co-founder, we took a step back and we said, why? And what is it about the thing we've built that people do love? So we crossed everything out. We had a whiteboard and we wrote everything that people used on the app up on the whiteboard and crossed everything off. And we ended up basically with one thing circled, which was photos. We said, okay, what if we threw away literally everything about this app and repositioned it around photos? So we did that, but that's not the end of the story. A very quick addition to the story is we did that pivot. We built this app. We didn't call it Instagram yet. And I decided I needed a week off because I was exhausted. I was like, I don't think this pivot's going to work. So I'm going to go to Mexico for a week to a little seaside town with who would become my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, Nicole. And we're walking along the beach, and I said, do you think you'll use this new version of this app called Bourbon that's photos only? And she said, no, I don't think I will because I don't like sharing my photos. My photos aren't good enough. And I said, why aren't your photos good enough? And she said, well, because all your friends take these amazing, beautiful filtered photos. And I was like, yeah, that's because they use filter apps. And she's like, well, you should probably add filters to the app. I said, that's a brilliant idea. So we finished that walk on the beach. I went back to the little hotel room we were staying in, and I researched how to make the first filter. And if you look way back on my profile, the first photo on my profile, the first the first photo ever on Instagram is a square photo of a very small dog in Mexico when we went out to lunch after I built the first filter on Instagram because of that walk on the beach.
Wow.
I'm proud to say she is now my wife, and I love her dearly.
Well, did you pay her? Did you pay her?
I was going to say,
but
I hope she has a good prenup, Kevin.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're both very, very happy with the situation. I'm very happy to be married to her, and we have this great life now, so it's awesome. But how did we not gone on that walk?
I remember I was at Yahoo, you guys, when Instagram came out, and somebody on my team says, you need to be on Instagram. It's this great new thing. And I was like, what? But I kind of got into it pretty quickly, and it just grew so fast, Kevin, to the point you sold it to Mark Zuckerberg for $1 billion, and which is a nice chunk of change. Sounds like
Katie, it was cheap. He and I
really
argued about this.
Oh
yes.
yeah, really?
Mark Zuckerberg got the bargain of a century.
Oh, you're right. I've read that. How much do you think you could have sold it for in retrospect, Kevin, or do you hate that question?
I don't hate the question because I'm so used to getting it now. I think I hated it the first couple times, but now I feel like I've come to terms with my answer, which is at the time. Do you know how many people, Katie, we had at the company when we sold it for $1 billion?
7, right?
Seven?
Maybe
it was 9, I think, maybe 9 or 10.
Yeah.
So Katie, imagine you have a group of kids in a room working on a photo app, and someone comes along and says, how about $1 billion? I don't know of many people that would turn that deal down. And, listen, coulda, shoulda, woulda, had we stayed the course, been independent? I don't know. I mean, how many examples of people, maybe I know more of them personally, have turned down acquisition offers
Facebook
for $100 million? Well, no, Facebook's the easy one. That's the one we all talk about. Let's talk about the ones that didn't work out.
You're
The
right.
ones
There's
that
tons
didn't
of,
work out.
yeah, you're right.
Tons
You're
of
right.
them that turned down 100 $200 million offers saying, you know what, we're going to stick the course. And now you've literally never heard of these companies.
I think my
So
point, Kevin, was that you were
yeah,
making something that was special and different. Having seen everything, I think, while I think they did help you grow quickly, I suspect you could have done it by yourselves because your product was quite magical in a way that not a lot of them are. And I get that, the risk factor. And he had investors, and it was a great deal because Facebook was really the juggernaut. Now, another company had turned him down, Snapchat, which has been, sort of in irons for a decade now. Also a terrific product, by the way, but he couldn't, he was going to do a copy version because that's what Mark does. I don't think it necessarily would have been as good, but it would have been a real challenge for someone like Kevin to push back. And then everyone would have copied what he was doing. That's for sure. And so I think that's more to the point, is that you have to have these calculations of how, where you're going to move. I just think they benefited more from you than you benefited from them.
So you don't think that there could have been another company that could replicate and scale Instagram? Is that, or you're saying that maybe Mark
Well,
could have, but who knows?
He could have tried. He did it a lot, but the creativity is required. And as I have said, Kevin doesn't have to. Kevin is creative, and I don't think there's a lot of creativity at Facebook. I don't. It's more like Microsoft, right? And so at the time, especially in order to grow, they needed to acquire things like WhatsApp and other things. What's interesting, Kevin, I want you to talk about this, is when you think about not whether or not you should have sold, but how much do you imagine they helped you grow? I don't think I've ever asked you that. How much do you think they, being within the juggernaut of Facebook, which it was at that moment, still is really, how would you, do you see a different, did you think they really did help you? I assume you did.
I think they helped us in a bunch of ways, and we helped them back in a bunch of ways. And there's a little bit of this dynamic of we and them, which I find so strange, by the way.
Yeah.
Because, like we had a little building on campus and it had a little Instagram logo on the outside, but we were all part of the same company. And many of the people that worked at Instagram from the day we sold on were from Facebook. And by the way, we had people who worked at Instagram who ended up going to work at Facebook on various products. So the like, and I'm bringing this up not to point out the way you're talking about us, but rather the way we talked about ourselves internally when I was there. It was such an us versus them dynamic. And it was very strange in my head always, because I was like, here we are now producing billions of dollars years in, billions of dollars. But it's as if we're like two siblings fighting over who gets the remote.
Well, it sounded
And
like
we're
that
not.
to me, though, Kevin, because everything I read, it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Mark Zuckerberg was kind of threatened by you and your success, and the fact that a lot of resources were going to Instagram. And I don't know, it sounds like his ego got in the way. Is that accurate?
I don't know that I can speak on his behalf for that. You'd have to ask him directly.
I mean, is that
I'm
how
not
you
sure.
felt?
The way that I felt was that nothing made sense logically about the way we were running the two companies. Logically, it was amazing that we had lightning in a bottle and we were producing, a product that was growing all over the world and, at double-digit growth rates per month. And then on top of that, producing billions of dollars. Yet for some reason internally, the dynamic was that we were disappointed.
Yeah.
And that was very strange. And basically the reason I left, by the way, and I've said this to friends, and I'm not sure I've ever said it to anyone else, but like the reason I left is because the more I felt that I put in and the more that we won, the harder my job got. The more difficult, the more, and not that jobs don't get harder as things go on, but it wasn't like that success was a good thing. It was almost as if that success was a bad thing because we had this product, Facebook Blue, which was going through some tough times. And I get that. And I probably, could have been a better, I don't know, sibling or whatever in terms of understanding how challenging that must be for those people and for those teams and for the brand. At the same time, I found it so strange that we didn't look at our situation as, holy crap, we are the luckiest people on earth and maybe the luckiest company on earth. That feels like a real tragedy in
Yeah.
retrospect.
Well, I read that you were on, I guess, doing some interviews, and Mark and Cheryl said basically you couldn't do interviews without getting permission from them. So it does sound like a bit of a power struggle. What's your take on that, Kara?
I think they were jealous, and I know they were jealous of Kevin, largely because of creativity, and this and the knock on them was that they stole ideas, that they were shoplifters essentially of other people's theories and ideas. Now, as it turned out, Instagram became an enormous engine for Facebook as Facebook started to wane in usage, in excitement, in young people being, especially young people. It was critical. To me, there's certain purchases in technology that are critical that really changed them. I think Google buying YouTube was one of them. Very smart, by the way, turned down by Yahoo, or they couldn't finish the deal essentially. And I think there are certain purchases where it's a real turning point. I think Instagram and probably WhatsApp together. Another person who left, by the way, another entrepreneur who really didn't like being part of the mothership. I think it was a critical thing, and it's sort of as rich and famous as you get. It doesn't matter if it wasn't you who did it. And I think Bill Gates suffered from this. Probably more towards Steve Jobs is like Bill Gates before he did all the philanthropy. If he had died then, it would have been the world's richest man died today. And if Steve Jobs died, which he later did, the world's greatest tech visionary died today. And I think Kevin was more in the visionary part of that, and Mark is in the world was in he's like a Henry Ford character, and so that's what makes it hard. And again, I'd love to ask you, getting back to the product, and that's really what you have to get to is the product itself and the iterations you make around it, including, as I've talked with Kevin about, doing stories. That was a Snapchat thing that
Right.
then Instagram did. Now, Kevin quite smartly and very cleverly has said to me, well, they made a radio in a car and we just made a better radio in a car. And I kind of accept that now. I accept that now.
I do too, but at the time I was like, wow, what a ripoff. I
Yeah,
mean,
but
It's funny, by the way, Kara, for a second that you'll say that Facebook are shoplifters, but like, to be clear, Story was a very direct, it wasn't a replica because I think we added some really neat features to it. But I do believe that, like, as much as Facebook might have invented the Facebook news feed,
yes,
now you can't see a social product without a news feed. But that wasn't a given back then. So these things are not property
That's
of
what
the
I mean.
founder.
Yeah,
But it's about who executes best on them. And now we're seeing that play out with the Twitter feed effectively across multiple products.
Yeah, everyone's doing a version of Twitter, including you and your new product, a version of. But the idea of it is a feed, isn't it? It really is a feed when you think about it. But one of the things that I think is important to remember is that not just from a creative point of view, it gave Facebook an enormous amount of credibility to own a product like this. It also was financially enormous, and a safer place than what was going on at Facebook. And I think that was really important, a pleasant place. Facebook had started to get different, right, as they got criticized. But Instagram, even though there are lots of problems on Instagram around lots of problems, it still was a place of a product of enjoyment, I guess. I don't know how else to put it, but a product of enjoyment more than anything else, and delight. And I think that's hard to do and sustain. Twitter has never been enjoyable. It's been funny. It's been vexing. It's been addictive, but enjoying, I don't think so. I don't, I guess in a broader sense. And
well,
that's very hard to do.
I want to move to Twitter in a second and sort of the current news landscape, which is a disaster in many respects. But before we do, I wanted to ask you about the negative side of Instagram, Kevin. Obviously, there are a lot of negative impacts on girls, on, mental health, on, sort of the comparison that it encourages. And is that just part of the deal? I mean, can anything be done about the psychosocial impact of some of these platforms, and specifically Instagram? And as you saw it having this impact, I'm curious what went through your mind.
I think it all comes down to leadership. The idea that you have a tool, and that tool, take nuclear energy. can be used for amazing things. It can produce clean, sustainable energy, but also, if used not in the right way, can create massive destruction. Tools themselves rarely have a very clear positive or negative effect. It's when you put that tool in someone's hand and that person decides to start making rules around it and judgments about what's allowed, what's not allowed, um, the way they decide to moderate things, their community guidelines, the tone they set as a leader with their own posts, if we're talking social media. And as a leader at Instagram early on, I decided that we should focus on being the nicest place on the internet. And nice is like a really lame word, but let's move past that to maybe kindness. So for instance, we were one of the first, if not the first major social network to use machine learning to detect bullying and intervene in bullying situations. Most people were worried about spam at this point. So if you went to any other network, they'd have spam filters and spam detectors, and we were focused on interactions that didn't qualify as spam, but were human to human interactions that were negative. And we would intervene and try to stop those things. Those are the types of decisions that I think made Instagram such a great place early on, because we used to have, Kara, we used to have this phrase internally called prune the trolls.
Yeah.
And we used to just we just block accounts of people who were causing issues very, very early on. And that was getting rid of the negative. But then we would also host these community meetups called Insta Meets. And we would bring together people on the platform in person, in a park, to meet each other, to put a face to a name. And those types of interactions very early on, I think, set an amazing tone for the community that lasted well beyond my tenure. But as you get bigger and bigger and you get into the billions, the law of large numbers says that you get just about everyone on the platform,
Yeah.
every type of person. So it becomes much harder to make these decisions. So maybe in one country something is well accepted, while in another country it's not accepted, and you have to make these really hard choices about what's allowed and what's not allowed. And you start to make people angry with these choices, but it all comes down to leadership. It all comes down to those fundamental decisions you make as a human holding that tool in your hand with the control.
Which I think is lost for a lot of people. A lot of tech people try to abrogate. I don't want to have anything to do, even as they built it. Like,
right. Well, we're a platform. We're not a publisher, right?
Yeah, but they built it in the first place. And I think one of the things that's important, and Kevin can talk this about his new thing, is you have to have a set of rules. And it's okay. You know, this whole canard that it's a public square, it's not a public anything. It's a private money making company. And I think that's I mean, I don't know, Kevin, I think these are companies. And you wouldn't have company has its rules, and so should this.
Are there any things that you see, Kevin, when you go on Instagram today that you wish wasn't happening, or changes you think, oh, I'm so pissed they're letting this happen, or if I were there, I would do X, Y, or Z?
I saw this amazing, I don't know if it was originally an Instagram reel or not, yesterday, by a comedian talking to the algorithm, the Reels algorithm, saying, okay, what do you have for me today? And the algorithm says, well, I've got an alt-right post for you with some conspiracy theories. And she says, wait, why? And the algorithm responds, well, we noticed you stopped and looked at it for a little while. She goes, yeah, but that's just because it was so crazy. Like it was like watching a train wreck. And the algorithm's like, uh-huh. And you sat there and looked at the comments for a little while, didn't you? And she goes, yeah, but that's just because I wanted to see how crazy people were. And so it was funny because it was true. Like the way these products work, and I'll answer your question more directly in a second. The way these products work is they look at signals for engagement, and then they try to increase engagement, because that's the way the company gets paid. If you spend more time on it, by the way, that's the way people are gold, time spent, DAU, daily active users. And if you release a bunch of very, very smart computer scientists on that goal, what you get are products that effectively show you the most salacious, most controversial content that exists. And yes, you can do things to try to not do that. But at the end of the day, the question is how you incentivize people and who's in control. And I think what we've seen, so you asked, what do I wish was different? I'm not sure it's an Instagram problem specifically, but products like Reels and product like YouTube Shorts or even TikTok do an enormous they're so optimized on engagement that they will show you things that you are not actually interested in, but they will make you stare at them forever. And then you wake up one day and you look around and you go, God, I just spent an hour. Was that like a useful hour of my life?
Right.
And part of why I started Artifact was the belief that you could use some of the same technology to personalize, but do it in a way that actually showed people things that made their life more informed, maybe a little bit better.
Kevin's talking a little bit, if you want to make an analogy, to sugar, right? Isn't this donut delicious? What a delicious donut. You may even not want it. You may want something healthy, or you might want something different. But
it's sitting in front of you.
Well, it's how you architect things. And, Kevin's a designer. If you architect for virality and speed, you're going to get a different thing than you architect for context and content, like really good, what you're looking for, right? Content.
Absolutely.
Actually. And so it's a question of what architecture you put into place. And so many of these things, or else you don't put anything into place, and people generally trend towards shitty stuff. Look at the shitty stuff. Look at the accident. That's what's going on Twitter right now. He's just removed everything. And so people who are bad players can come in and really attract you in a way that is just the human brain. It crawls down your cerebral cortex, really.
Kara, I have an example. Sure. I love coffee. Okay. And I do go to Starbucks. And by the way, people who I claim I'm a coffee nerd, and then I tell people I go to Starbucks, and they're like, "Wait, what?" But I do. Maybe I'm a little bit of an addict.
You went to Starbucks. I'm surprised.
Listen, I'm a busy guy with 2 kids. Sometimes you need a great, quick coffee mobile order.
Kind of a coffee snob. You are.
But here's the thing: I've been going to Starbucks for God knows how many years, and Starbucks is a milkshake company, guys. It's a milkshake company. Go into any Starbucks and just sit there and watch people ordering. They're not ordering drip coffees, maybe once in a while a latte. People walk out of there with huge milkshakes with whipped cream on top. And yes, there's caffeine inside, but think about what machine produced, what set of incentives produced that milkshake shop. It's like, well, okay, people like our coffee, but how can we have them have coffee during the day, not the morning? Well, let's blend up some ice with it. Let's add some sugar. What do people like? Oh, okay, we'll do summer drinks. And before you know it, one of the most original coffee companies in the world now primarily sells milkshakes. Right. And if you think about it in terms of social media, that's exactly what happens. You start off about being this Times Square and ideas and everything. And then you say, oh, well, actually, what gets people to stay around? And what you end up with is fight videos and car crashes and silly animal dances and
dunking.
That's right.
But I would argue though that news is important. That people are still on Twitter because news is there, right? Right now with the vote in Congress, it's the best place to get the most up-to-minute news because the people on it. So you can move people towards quality things very easily, but even if you can sort of do this with the jazz hands with the milkshake, I think.
I want to be clear that I still love Starbucks. I still go there. It's just, you got to look at what incentives produce at the end of the day in your business. What do they produce? And if you chase profit, if you chase margin, if you chase expansion, you will get to a point where what you end up with are products that are purely engineered for that rather than maybe the original mission. And the only company that I can't really come up with a bunch of examples for is Apple. They kind of just continue to produce great products that people need.
Yep.
So I don't know if it's specific to consumer software, but it's something I think a lot about as someone who founded one of these things. And now as an outsider, it's always easier to be an armchair quarterback. Okay.
Well,
it's always easier to be on the outside.
Jobs did talk about it. If you give people shitty things, they'll take shitty things. If you give them good things, they won't good. He talked about it almost incessantly, the quality and stuff like that. And when they haven't been quality, they've had failures. Remember Ping? Do you remember Ping?
Of course, yeah.
Ping. I don't remember
It
Ping.
was their social network. And he knew it from the day it started that it was terrible because that wasn't their strong suit. I went after I went and saw they debuted it at one of the events, and I ran into him backstage, and I think he had Chris Martin on that year. Um, and he said, "What did you think of Ping?" Afterwards, you go, there's a thing afterwards where you get to go look at the new products. And he goes, "What did you think of Ping?" I was like, "That sucks. And I really hate Chris Martin too." And he was like, "Thanks." And I was like, "Well," he goes, "Ping really sucks. Be nice to my friend Chris Martin."
Why do you hate Chris Martin?
I just don't like his
Oh,
music.
I thought Steve Jobs hated Chris Martin. I was like, why is the guy?
No, he loved him.
Coldplay's great.
I just don't like him. He's whiny. I don't know what to say. I like my whininess from Taylor Swift, if you don't mind. But like, I'm curious, Kevin, with Artifact, explain what it is for people who don't know, and also, you're going in a much more vegetable direction. Really, you're going for full vegetable or full news junkie, essentially.
Well, I'll challenge that we're going full vegetable, but I'll get there first by explaining what it is. Artifact is a fully machine learning driven personalized newsreader. So the idea is that you show up and we're going to show you a bunch of things because you told us you're interested in technology, in NFL and cars, or you're interested in fashion and you're from San Francisco. And we will crawl the internet, not the entire internet, but what we deem as the trustworthy internet. And we'll bring all that content together and then we'll serve it to you in a feed. And depending on what you tap on and what you engage with, we'll try to learn what your actual interests are. And then we'll customize that feed over time. So what's happened for me personally is when it started, it was just a bunch of tech news. And now it's a mix of Japanese architecture and travel recommendations, parenting tips because I have 2 young kids, and local San Francisco politics. And that's great for me. It's a mix of wonderful publications that I never would have heard of otherwise. It helped me discover local publications like the San Francisco Standard. Things like this bring content to you rather than having you get served content because someone decided to post about it.
Or searching for it and searching
right.
across a million different platforms. But Apple News does the same for me, Kevin. How is this different?
Yeah, so there are a bunch. There's Apple News, there's Google News, there's Flipboard, there's Newsbreak, there are a lot of them. And I'm going to say this, and it's going to sound like a non-answer, but you have to see it to know the difference. My pitch would be that we focus on high quality, non-trashy publications that aren't so intellectual that they feel out of touch, but that aren't like kind of the content mills that just show you more celebrity photos. And that it's like, thank you, someone finally built a news recommendation service that understands me as someone who is, and when I say me, I mean someone who loves tech, who loves things that are on the bleeding edge, wants to learn about AI, maybe they have a budding interest in crypto, like those types of things. It's like we go beyond just the major publications too. We find interesting Substacks. We find interesting recipe authors. So you're not going to find that on a place like Apple News. You're not going to find that on Google News. And that's okay because they're focused on different things. But I think we go a little bit more intellectual and we go a little deeper in terms of unique sources. And then on top of that, the competitive angle, I do believe our machine learning is better than a bunch of these. So we will personalize better for you, or at least that's our goal. So that's how we're different.
How much does it cost?
It's free, completely free. I thought you were asking how much does it cost to run, and turns out a lot. Because, but we have no revenue right now. I basically, we're self-financed. And one of the reasons we're self-financed is because we wanted to be completely independent right now. We wanted to be able to make our own choices, and we can afford to run the service for free for consumers. So it's available on the App Store. It's available on Android as well, on the Play Store, and you can download it. And I really mean this. You have to see it to believe it. So you use it and you ask yourself a week in, does this thing know me? And if the answer is yes, you give it 2 weeks and then you start to be surprised. And that's really our goal.
You named 4 areas you're interested in. You said local San Francisco politics, parenting articles, Japanese architecture, and I forget the 4th one. What was the 4th one, Kevin?
I don't remember.
I don't either. But
It's
but
yeah.
what about like someone like me and Kara, I imagine you're like me. I'm
Yeah.
interested in probably 25 different things. You know, I'm a generalist. I want to know what's happening from Meghan and Harry to Tom Friedman's latest column about the Middle East to what Richard Haas might have written in Foreign Affairs to what The Economist is saying about Israel to everything to how it'll affect you. I mean, obviously, I'm heavy on foreign policy right now, given everything that's going on in the world. But how, how can you serve me up over such a broad area of interests, things that I want to see without completely overwhelming me?
There are a couple ways. The first thing that I think is really interesting to talk about here is you just discussed revealed versus stated preferences. And if we ask you to name all your preferences and we put a piece of paper in front of you, for most people, that's actually very, very difficult. It's very hard to say all the things that you love without seeing them. But if a system learns, and this is called exploration in the machine learning verbiage, if you can explore potential topics for someone and then just note, Katie spent a bunch of time on foreign affairs. She loves Thomas Friedman. Whenever Thomas Friedman writes, she spends a bunch of time reading this article. But she also loves like the latest Harry and Meghan gossip. Those things are not mutually exclusive, but they are on major publications. When you open up a major publication, you have sections. You have the front page. Harry and Meghan are not on the front page of the New York Times or the Washington Post most of the time, probably ever. But for you, maybe they should be. And that's really the dream here is that via exploration, we can make that front page sing for you, that it can feel like it was designed literally just for you.
Which has
And
been an
that yeah,
old goal of everybody. Yahoo, you had personalization. Everyone's tried to sort of create this individualized news feed for everyone. That's sort of been a long
yeah.
time goal.
And maybe what I could do quickly is just talk about where we've expanded recently because the scope of the company has changed pretty significantly, and that's some of what Kara was talking about when she said we're building our own little Twitter. Um, we've always believed that we wanted to build this personalized homepage for you that other people have tried and not done it very well. One of the realizations through this, I believe, is that it's not that it's necessarily hard to do, it's that I'm not sure people are that impressed. Not necessarily with us, but just they need more. They need more than articles. They want spice. They want unique, interesting content. And where that typically comes from is user generated content. When people actually post something that they're thinking that's unique that you can't find anywhere else. So we added this tab called links, which now will let you it lets you post links to things that you find interesting and say something about them, which could be not from a major publication. It could be a random blog that you found, or maybe your own blog. But it also lets you post just on your own. So if you want to write 4 or 5 paragraphs about something, you can and post into it. And this feed has been really fun to watch take off in the last few weeks. It's really added a different life to Artifact. So now you can get your news, which is fine, but you can get it on other places. But now you have these really unique posts and links that you can get basically only on Artifact on this other tab. But it's all part of discovering content using personalization.
But is
And
it
that's
text
been
or is it text or video or
It's
photos or
links. It's links of what you want. It depends, right? It depends. I'm doing
It
it right
depends.
now.
So everything has a cover image, just like an article. And so you can browse the feed and it's very visual. And someone will say, like, my favorite croque monsieur, recipe, or my all-time favorite night at the French Laundry, someone just posted. And you can scroll through their photos and then they wrote a review of their experience at the French Laundry. So think of it as like a mini article. While we call them links, they're like mini articles. They're visual, they have cover images, they have supporting images for whatever the person's writing about. But then on top of that, you get a chance to read like a mini blog post. Another way of talking about this is almost like a super tweet. So you've got these little tweets, but now you have super tweets, and they've got images and they've got lots of context, not just like a little pithy thought. And I believe that the feature, not a bug, like one of the most popular features on I don't even know what to call it anymore. Is it X or is it Twitter? Let's call it X. Uh, are threads, but they're broken up and they're confusing, and you got to reply to the right one. And so now you just put it all together, and it's in one place. So the way to think about this is a place where anyone can go to write very short blog posts and distribute them via machine learning to the people who care about them. So if you write a post on Japanese architecture, I said I was interested in that. Like, let's imagine you're super into it as well. You go to Portland and you take photos of all the really interesting Japanese architecture in Portland. You do a post. Now that gets delivered to me, even though we might not know each other. And all of a sudden you have an audience for your budding interest in Japanese architecture. That's the dream here, is that we can create this market where producers and consumers can get matched and their interests are matched. I think it's really
interest matching. There used to be a company called Six Degrees. Do you remember them?
Yeah.
Amazon ended up buying them. And the idea of putting interests together has always been another dream. And what's happened is it's degenerated into chaos, which is whatever bubbles up in terms of enragement is what wins, versus, because it's like a traffic accident, versus your interest. One of the reasons TikTok is so successful, it does see your interests and it knows what you like. And that's more media than social, right? And so the goal is to be more media than social, because social has become so toxic in a lot of ways. And that's what's difficult about these businesses, is that people have gotten trained. Like, in a separate thing, Neva was a very good search engine, but everyone was used to Google, right? They just weren't going to pay for it. There was just no business. And that's the challenge Kevin faces, is people have become used to crap, really, in lots of ways. And putting up with, Cheech and Chong ads or porn ads on Twitter or whatever, never a very good business anyway. And that's the difficulty, is training people. And I don't mean vegetables. I mean, it's stuff that's actually useful to you around the news business, versus a TikTok, where if you like ASMR or whatever you happen to like, it serves it up to you. You're sort of a passive. This is more of an engaged experience.
How is business, Kevin? I mean, are you doing well? How are you getting people to download the yet another app and want to kind of change their habits?
I think like what we've done is create a beautiful product for some very passionate people, but nowhere near the amount of people that use Instagram, right? And the question is, how do you go from one to the other? Because Instagram started off very small at the beginning. I mean, everyone likes to think, oh, it was this overnight success. And don't get me wrong, the first day of Instagram, we had 25,000 people sign up, and it was great. And it continued to grow over time, and it retained people. The question is not, can you get attention? The question is, can you retain people with a product that they love? And we have a group of people that love this product. And our main challenge is, can we be mainstream? Can we be for more than just news junkies? Because I totally agree with Kara that people are used to the status quo. And in the same dinner conversation that I mentioned before last night, Kara, I said to my friend, I said, do you believe that there's open space in the consumer internet still? Or did I found a company initially in 2010 when there was just all this white space, and if you threw a rock, you weren't going to hit anyone, and like you could just find success if you built something not terrible. And has the world just developed to the point where literally every consumer idea that is basic, and when I say basic, I mean, buying things on the internet from Amazon, or saying something to a lot of people with Twitter, or posting a photo with Instagram, have those jobs, I call them jobs, have those jobs just been filled by very large, very successful companies? And where's the white space? Where can people succeed? Because, I mean, Kara, what's the last successful consumer startup you have seen? I'm curious.
Oh, not
in
by
a long
big
time,
company.
right?
It's been a long time someone's broken through, right?
What did your friend say?
No.
Oh, my friend's an investment banker, so he didn't know. He was hoping I would have the answer.
I can't think of one. You're very good. And also, it also has the law of big numbers, is that, this is something Ben Horowitz, of all people, said to me. He's like, no one's going to create a search engine. No one's going to create a consumer, commerce company because of Amazon. search engine because of Google. No one's going to create all these various things because of the large players. And that's the real problem, is how do you even break through? Now, the one example is, I got to say, TikTok, right? Came out of nowhere.
I'll challenge,
Okay.
which is, I think it's very easy as someone who, maybe I was 25 at the time, something like that, Instagram started. It's very easy to be optimistic and green and just believe there's all this opportunity. Then it's very easy now on the other side. I'm about to turn 40. I'm 39 right now. To believe that there's no opportunity, or believe that maybe some doors have closed along the way. But here's the wonderful thing about the internet, that it surprises everyone. I mean, when we founded Instagram, could you imagine that anyone would be
No.
able to found an image sharing social network to compete with Instagram? And then Snap came along.
Right.
And then after Snap, could you believe anyone could compete with YouTube, Instagram, and Snap in video? And by the way, not even a US company? Like, this is incredible. Like, of course, there are always opportunities. I think, I can't remember who said it, but there's this like phrase of like the earned secret. What secret do you have about an opportunity that everyone else is just passing on, that is it's sitting there in clear view to you? It's just not in clear view to everyone else. And when the iPhone came out, I believed personally that all of a sudden everyone was going to take a lot more photos because they had a camera in their pocket. And because those photos were connected to the internet, you could share them very, very easily. And that was going to be an enormous change. But no company at the time saw that. They thought, we're on desktop. People like sharing albums. They all have DSLRs. It's going to be fine. So what you have to do, I think, in these situations is fight the urge to believe that all the doors have closed, and
Right.
instead look out and say, what are the opportunities that have changed because of some fundamental technology change, like, for instance, generative AI
Oh, that's full of
or a
ideas.
new
See,
device?
that's full of ideas, because there's going to be generative AI for insurance, for healthcare, all kinds of areas. So it reminds me a little bit of when the mobile phone came, right? That you couldn't have imagined Instagram before the mobile phone, could you?
No,
Easily.
no, no,
It wouldn't, but
I
you
absolutely
w-
not.
needed
I
the
was going to
first one.
ask you guys, what about Threads? I know it's Meta, but
Yeah.
that to me was an example of a new platform coming out. It had a
Yeah.
huge opening day or whatever, and then it kind of
Well, it's
took
doing
took.
better.
Is
It's
it
doing
doing
better.
better? It sort
It
of
is.
took a nosedive and now it's back.
Well, it's not back. I think they're adding really good product. Actually, this is the first time I've seen Facebook make a product that's actually enjoyable themselves.
Are
It's
you
really
on
quite,
Threads?
yes, a lot actually, because Twitter's become impossible and I get called terrible names every day of the week. And it's mostly by Elon Musk. Um, so it's a really good product. It's a really enjoyable place. It has the reason why, and I would credit Kevin with this, it's got an Instagram feel to it. It's fun. It's interesting. People are very clever and lovely. And so I think people are dying for a lovely experience. Now, there's been others. I like all the others too. I do. And I like little bits and pieces. But I have to say, I've been super impressed by how quickly they're iterating on Threads and making I don't know, Kevin, what do you think of it? I feel like it's because it feels like Instagram, but in a text version.
I was discussing this with Mike the other day, and I said that, like, I think uh, Mike, my co-founder, I should be clear, at Instagram and also now at Artifact. Um, and I said, like, companies are, I think, at their best, a set of principles and how you do things, how you treat people, how you design things, what choices you make when there are hard choices to be made. Um, and for better or for worse, a lot of the principles that made Instagram work, whether they were mine or Mike's or some employee that joined us along the way, have been carried over into this new product, Threads. And I think Adam, who runs Instagram now, has done a wonderful job keeping that team together and directing them to use the same principles that were built to use it to build to build Instagram, to now build Threads. And that's awesome to see. But it's easy to give credit to a company that amasses 100 million people in the first week or two. But you have to remember, they've got an audience of billions to show this thing to. So it's not like it's just a startup growing out of nowhere
Right.
to 100 million users. Like,
Yeah.
they have a little advantage. So I think what's more interesting to see is strategically over the next year, what steps do they make to prove to people that they provide more value than
Yeah.
X?
Yeah,
blue sky or
they
whatever.
definitely started on third base and they've hit a home run. But I mean, I think
100%.
here's how I look at it. And Walt Mossberg used to say that about sometimes a Microsoft project would come out he actually likes, and his reaction was, "Well, it doesn't suck," because suck was where he started, right? And so with this one, I'm like, this doesn't suck. This is actually pretty good. You're right; it has an advantage. What I'm saying is they've got an enormous, there's a real empty space up the middle right now with Elon, the things he's doing to Twitter.
Yeah.
And so that's it has to be a big player that does this. I think a small player, it would be very hard to create the kind of audience, except if it's
I
yours,
agree.
which is like news. This is news people that are interested in topics. You're going for communities of interest. They're communities of news, really, or of instant, I guess. Instant
Yeah, to be
news.
clear, I don't actually think that that Artifact is a direct competitor of Threads in any
No.
meaningful way. Like Artifact and our social side is much more about browsing what people have decided to share their thoughts on in a slightly longer form way. It's shorter and less formal than a Substack, and it's longer than a tweet or is it a thread? Is that what we're
Yeah.
calling them? Like the
Yeah.
individual. Uh, um, so and that's a specific choice we're making. And by the way, everything big starts small, right? So everything big starts with some core community that seems super like like almost too small. When Facebook started, it was just for Harvard students. Could you imagine that it would be as big as it was today? When Instagram started and it was for tech nerds with DSLRs in the Bay Area, could you ever have believed it would touch over 1 billion people per day? Absolutely not. So you have to
I would
choose a
disagree with you.
starting point that
When I used your product for the first time, I went, "Oh, I get this," and that doesn't happen all the time. I would disagree. I think there's a moment where people go, "Oh, I like that." You know what I mean? Same
but
thing with
Kara, you're
Uber,
also one of the more thoughtful people in
I
tech that have
guess.
seen things before.
Yeah.
My point is, most people, when they see companies start, think, that idea is too small. And the question isn't, is the idea too small at the beginning? It's what is the ambition of the person who's running it and what direction are they headed? Because if you can map out that Mark is going to take it from Harvard to other Ivy League schools, to every school, to colleges, sorry, to every other college, to high schools, et cetera, and then take over the world, like then you say, okay, this is interesting. But I don't know. There are a lot of companies that get started and stay very happy with very small audiences. So it's not about the idea, it's about the direction.
Hey, before we go, I want to just spend a couple of minutes talking about the media landscape and the state of news, which is what prompted you to create Artifact, Kevin, in the first place. And I'd love to get your take on what is happening on Twitter now or X, and what Elon Musk has done to turn it into such a cesspool. Obviously, people can buy blue checks, so nobody is really verified. The ad model has changed. There's AI, I think, that's creating a lot of dis and misinformation. But I'd love to ask you, Kara, what has X become and why?
Well, it's interesting because it's still a little necessary because it's so everyone's there and it's frantic. You know what I mean? And so if
Mhm.
there's if
I
there's a
still go
news,
on it, I do.
sure, it's useful. It's because everybody's there. But it's sort of like one of those clubs or a place, a downtown that you still have to kind of go to, but it sucks now. It's like it's dirtier. There's really weird people hanging around.
No one
It's
says
not,
that about San Francisco. I'm not
no,
sure what you're talking about.
no. I love San Francisco. Don't insult San Francisco to Kara Swisher. So I find it really hard to use. I have to turn off comments now because of the flood of really crazy people. And I'm joking about Elon Musk, but he also, is really unpleasant. And so it's become an unpleasant experience, but you put up with it because of the benefits of getting instant. Like if there's no other place to go right now to watch the vote happening, right?
And didn't he fire everybody who was kind of evaluating content and flagging
A
content?
lot. Well, they
And
say
and
not
then I keep
everybody.
getting these ads, what doctors don't want you to do to your coffee. Like, why
Yes.
why do they keep
Yes.
why are they
Because they're
keep
paying
feeding me
because the
that
check is
ad?
cashing. Because the check is cashing. I don't know. I think it's really. I think I think it could go for a while. These things can go for a while. Kevin knows that. These things can hold on for, and he's the richest man in the world, so he can afford it. It's like having one of these mega yachts that's seeping oil out of it. He can keep doing it and paying the fines for it for a long time. I suppose his goal is the everything app, but nobody's going to trust him with everything. Like, there's no way. And he's sort of wandered down conspiracy theory highway, and so there's an audience for that for sure for a long, 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 long time. I don't think it's a good experience. It never was. Never was a great product, but now it's not a very good product with a really unpleasant aftertaste to it. And I think that ultimately people will use it less and less, and then all the good people will leave, and then you're left with a bunch of really terrible people yelling at each other.
What was frustrating to you, Kevin, about the news environment? And, how did you say, I need to fix this, or I need to fill a hole that's missing?
I want to be clear that I think Artifact is much more than just news. Like, of course, we're in the news category in the App Store, and that's the easiest way to talk about what we are. But I think my frustration actually is that people only think about news when you talk about news. They don't think about all the amazing content out there that has nothing to do with the day's headlines. The day's headlines you can read anywhere.
Right.
If you go onto the Washington Post, you can see the same, maybe slightly more or less, informative article than the next headline on the next major publisher. And it's all very, very important. But what about all that interesting stuff that you wouldn't see on the cover of a major newspaper? Like the most interesting homes nearby, or a great recipe, or like I said, I'm a parent, and there's all this discussion around how to raise kids in an age of social media, and really interesting bloggers talking about how they're doing that with their kids. You just wouldn't see that. So it's not like, okay, we can talk about news because that's
We
the
should probably
easiest way
call it
to explain it.
a content app, really.
Yeah, that's right. And I think people are thirsty for that type of information because they don't want yet another if it bleeds it leads story. What they want is some value in their life, a discovery. Like, there's this guy who just documented his trip throughout Japan in a photo essay, and I found it on Artifact. And it was this moment where I've been to Japan only a few times. It's one of my favorite places on earth. But I scrolled through, and I was just like, okay, I'm taken back, and I'm not reading about some awful thing that happened in downtown San Francisco today, because I can get that elsewhere. So that's the opportunity, is not necessarily the news industry, but rather, what are people reading? What are people being served, and why? And if you focus on these platforms that focus on the most insane stories being pushed to you, you're just going to get that type of content I said I wanted to avoid. So the real opportunity here is, can you learn someone's interest, and can you delight them with content that doesn't make them want to shut the app in anger every single day? And I think that's what
I
we're
think
up
the
to.
word delight you're using is absolutely the case. I mean, that's why I do have a good feeling about Threads. I find it delightful sometimes. I was laughing at it the other day. They have some astronomy person right on there that just puts all this really cool astronomy. I'm not interested in astronomy, but I love it, right? And I don't know why, or they had a video that made me laugh, or cat videos or whatever. And on Artifact just now, stuff I wouldn't have found, like there's a piece that someone else discovered that then showed me, which was, when was the last time Mark Andreessen talked to a poor person? It made me laugh. I was like, probably never, and since he was a kid, essentially, when he was poor. That's the kind of thing you need. I think if there's a trend, Kevin, maybe you could answer this. There's a trend toward getting sick of crap. Like, everyone is sick of crap. And I do think there is a trend towards, and I think it's the same with voters. They don't want to hear anymore from screaming people, screaming angry people. They want to hear about things they like, about their family. And I think that's kind of a secret, silent majority of people. I mean, of being delighted by things, or discovering things that are of interest to them, even if they're hard stories or whatever.
But do you think they want
I
to
think
hear things that are not so partisan too? I mean,
Anything.
I'm desperate to actually have someone explain to me what is going on with this committee that's investigating Joe Biden and claiming that his family has made $10 million in it's on some right-wing news site that actually get their newsletter because I want to hear what they're saying. But I sent it to a friend and I said, I'm so confused. Is any of this actually true?
Well, yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think verifying information is really hard today. You never know who to trust, even with large publications. You don't know if there's some ulterior motive or partisan angle. And I think one of the reasons why I'm excited about Artifact and the algorithmic approach is there's all these new advancements in balancing perspectives. So there's this thing called bridging algorithms. And the idea is like you can kind of lump people based on their history of reading into, right or left politically. And what you can do is look for articles that actually resonate with both rather than just deepen the divide. And this is well studied. It's actually used on Twitter today on X, ironically, Kara, for their community notes product. That's how they decide which community notes actually get shown, because otherwise you would have people on the right doing community notes correcting the lefties and the lefties correcting the righties, right? So like the way it can be applied in mass to news and information is by noticing that certain things have a bias, not in terms of content, but who they resonate with.
Yeah.
And then finding content that brings people together. We're far too small and early right now for a lot of this to make sense.
Is anybody doing that, Kevin? Is anybody doing that?
I haven't heard of anyone else even considering it.
Yeah.
And it's incredible to me because it's well, what's funny, Kara, is it's actually not hard. The hard choice, meaning technically it's not hard. What's hard is to make the choice to do it. Because if you are seen as somehow trying to push liberal content to conservatives or conservative content to liberals, you violate one of the groups. And I think that's very hard when you're very large and you're trying to balance whatever party is in power with legislation against your company and investigations. And so it becomes a very difficult place to be as a large company, but not a difficult place if you're a smaller company trying to grow.
That's
what I'm excited about. Yeah.
It's antithetical, though, to what Kara often calls engagement through enragement. Like if you want people, you want to feed the dogs the dog food and you want affirmation instead of information, challenging people's worldview, to me, would work against sort of the whole visceral connection you have to content that makes you stay on the platform, right?
Well, in this case, I'm explaining something slightly different, which is you're looking for content that resonates with both sides. So it actually drives engagement on both sides because people see some common thread in it. And usually, by the way, that's right.
Talking about commonality.
That's right.
Years ago when AOL started, that's how it started. And the first thing I ever noticed it was when he had a group of quilters who had met on AOL and they had made a quilt of an AOL symbol. And they finally met in person and met him and they felt like they knew him. And it was so positive because these were people so different from each other that just liked to quilt. And they managed to create it online. And I remember thinking, this could be used for such good things and it could be used for such bad things. Like I could see the opposite. People that like to make bombs and blow up people they don't like. I saw
or white supremacists.
Yeah. Yeah. No, listen, AOL was good for white supremacists early on too. So connection is what you're talking about really in the end.
Well, I'm excited. I'm excited to check out Artifact and use it. I downloaded it.
I appreciate that.
I have a New York Times, a Wall Street Journal, New York Times. Wait a second. I'm looking at, I've got a lot of news, but I also have Britney Spears reveals the real reason she shaved her head. And
we need some Harry and Meghan gossip on.
I also have this is New York Times, a deep fried faux sparks scandal at the State Fair of Texas. I love their article.
That is one of my favorite recent articles. Did you read about this, Kara?
No, I missed it.
This is about a Texas State Fair with deep fried. It's like a faux burrito. Anyway, I'm very into food, so that probably got placed there.
I'm into food too. I'm into food.
Deep fry faux. Well, they deep fry everything.
Exactly. Now I have to send you the article. It will make you laugh and delight.
You do that. Anyway, I got to get going.
I know you guys. Kevin, thank you so much for doing this. It was really fun to talk to you. Good luck with your latest venture. And
Kevin, I'll call you. I'll be in San Francisco soon. All right. And we'll
love that.
We'll walk around the hellscape, which is not a hellscape.
Okay.
at all. All right.
No, it's
okay.
actually quite nice.
Beautiful.
All right,
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks so much,
Thanks,
Kevin.
Kara.